Hey guys, LT here. So last time we were talking about on Below the Line, the issues around PUBG, the game being copied, Brendan Green, player unknown, talking out about this and saying how frustrated he was and that there wasn't any real protection for basically people's ideas in games in terms of copyright and intellectual property. This is obviously patently false. There are plenty of protections that exist and have existed for an incredibly long time. However, we do understand that, for example, in China, there are constant theft of people's intellectual property and seems to be very little we can do about it. The question was Brendan Green speaking to that, or was he speaking to games more like Fortnite, which the company Bluehole had already spoken out about and even potentially threatened legal action? So the question was, what was he talking about? Because he really didn't specify. Michael Cornwall says, it really does sound very much like PlayerUnknown is getting frustrated at the fact that Fortnite is a free game and has had as much success as it has. I put many hours into both. I must say I do prefer Fortnite, but any claim that Fortnite is copying PUBG is ridiculous. The only plausible way is that it has a map with 100 players and a storm encroaches on players until one man is left standing. Fortnite, like you said, has taken this and used a very different art style, more importantly different game mechanics. The building element to Fortnite is one of the main reasons I enjoy it more, and more importantly what makes it a completely different game and experience to PUBG. Overall, I think PlayerUnknown sees the success that Fortnite has had, and especially on console, it runs so much better. I play on both PC and console, and I doubt you've seen the negative reaction that PUBG, I think everybody's seen that now, has had on console, not even be able to go above 30 frames. They've tried pretty hard, I think, to try and pull that back recently because they've had so much backlash. They've tried to sort of quick fix that. He says, so I think PlayerUnknown especially is just frustrated at how much success Fortnite has had on the console market especially, and I think he does as well, that he's lost his chance of being the biggest battle royale game on console, which is a huge loss to him financially. It's a bit of a difficult one. I mean, you can't really say what one person's point of view when it comes to that is, what their agenda is. We can't know what he's looking at. Their game has already made a shit ton of money. It could well be that Bluehole is putting more pressure there because companies are the ones that usually want to make the money. I mean, I've spoken to Brendan Green. I spoke to him at Twitch London. I didn't get the impression of him of being a kind of person who was only in things for the money. He seemed very genuine, very down to earth, and I didn't get the impression that he was just out and out pissed off about things and looking for that, you know, kind of financial gain. On the other hand, that was way before any of this kind of stuff really started to kick off. But as I say, you can't know what's in someone's mind, and how really well can you know a person when you're speaking to them for just half an hour. Tula says, I'm suspecting people behind PUBG are frustrated with copies that actually copy the game assets to make similar games. This has been a problem as long as games have been popular, with player bases above 1 million around the world, whether that's Ragnarok Online, World of Warcraft, others that came after this. However, suspicion does make a fact that they really should have been more clear about their intended meaning behind their words. Yeah, that's probably the biggest core thing for me. Like I say, you know, Brendan seems quite a sincere person, but, you know, I think it would be very helpful if they would just clearly state what it is that their problem. Are they talking about China, or are they talking about other games over here? Because we all know the crazy stuff which happens in China in regards to intellectual property. That's just kind of a given. It shouldn't be, but it is. He says, why I think it was more about the game assets. Well, just a few days ago, I saw a YouTuber promoting a mobile game which was an exact carbon copy down to PUBG, pretty much everything except their UI. I don't mind games that take an idea and the gameplay, but using exactly similar or same looking assets makes me sick. Of course, if the assets were bought from a third party, for example Unreal Engine Marketplace, well, that's justified, nothing you can do about it, but you could edit the assets, make them more personalized to your project so they aren't identical assets. I don't know if that's what's happened, so I can't fully judge without more information. However, I do intend to be more suspicious towards those Chinese mobile games and cheap MMORPGs in regards of them not just buying those assets. Okay, next up, John, who says, in regards to PUBG being ripped off, I see an ad for a mobile game all the time called Rules of Survival. Art style's very similar, motorcycle helmets similar, buildings, clothes, even vehicles. Additionally, they've got a roast turkey dinner for winning the game, whereas PUBG obviously has chicken. It's pretty much a blatant rip-off. Now, I have seen recently some people that work for Bluehole and in regards to PUBG posting stuff on social media where they're highlighting some of these blatant rip-offs and showing them side by side and going, look at this, isn't it an outrage? Everybody would agree, yeah, it's an outrage. But the other thing is, there's nothing else to really say about it. Like, yeah, if they're literally ripping off your stuff and it's very blatant, well, that's going to be covered by your intellectual property, because it means they're replicating and basically taking your art style. They're basically taking your concept there. You know, they're actually taking your copyright. and so you could absolutely go after them with a lawsuit. So why don't they do that? Well, the reason they probably don't go after it is because they probably deem it to be not worth their while. Because these companies are probably very small, the companies are probably not making a huge amount of money, and therefore Bluehole just realised, hey, it's not actually financially worth our while to go after them, so we just tolerate it. That's often the case with some of these things. The other problem is that often because you're dealing with sort of, I guess, China's legal system, if we are talking about that, from what I understand, it's just very, very difficult, and it's not particularly easy to sort of deal over there as it would be over here. Maybe their sort of systems, they just kind of don't respect the same systems. Actually, this is something that's been talked about in a wider issue recently in the US. I think the US has recently been speaking about, in terms of the US government currently, have actually been talking about how China is basically kind of complicit and being sort of passive in terms of enabling this kind of thing, in the sense that it's actually damaging, for example, US businesses in terms of their copyright and, you know, intellectual property being stolen. Nonetheless, as I say, if they're talking about these kind of small, really almost absurd, blatant rip-offs, I just think that's not really something that PlayerUnknown Brendan really needs to be speaking about. It's something everybody is aware of. It's something everybody is aware already is a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because there's very little you can actually do about it. If it was over here in Europe or the US, you could shut it down. But if it's somewhere else, like in China, well, you're talking about a much bigger level, and you're not really going to be able to sort of legislate or really make any kind of changes at the level that he's going to be talking about that would actually make any significant difference, which makes you just question why even talk about it in the first place. As I say, I really can't imagine that it would be infringing on their gigantic profits that they've made so far anyway. So that's why it makes you think, well, why would he be speaking about these really obscure things? And that's why I sort of read into it that he's actually talking about things which are sort of more interpretations, which therefore, in my opinion, wouldn't come under intellectual property. And that's, I think, where a lot of people are getting pissed off. Okay, next up, Jamie, who says, Brendan Green has a seriously delusional sense of self-importance. He got really lucky to be the first person to develop a decent game based off of a remarkably unoriginal concept that led to a wildly successful early access cycle. He sees himself as a pioneer of sorts, expects people to worship him and just not jump on the interesting new bandwagon genre. He needs to get over himself. I don't think the guy's got the chops to deal with the insane amount of press he's getting and dealing with it in the most overly defensive way possible when he's got no reason to. People like him should not be putting themselves up as a poster child of their own project. He just puts a target on his back and has no idea how to handle it, so he just says and does stupid and irrational things. And before we get to the last comment of today, I would just say that a lot of the comments that you guys posted today surprised me in terms of how consistent they were. A lot of them were repeating this idea that, Brendan is perhaps having a bit of a tough time dealing with the level of attention he's had with PUBG, or that perhaps it's being pushed by the company and they're obsessed with money, which is a classic, or perhaps just that, as I say, it's quite overwhelming. And that they are sort of maybe they are sort of pissed off at some of these other games that have kind of infringed it, and because there is this feeling, I think, when you see streamers speaking about the game and people that really play this at a big level, or that have supported this game for a long time, since grassroots, right from the very beginning, there's almost like a little bit of tribalism with PUBG. I think would be probably, tribalism is like the word of the end of this year, tribalism, and people say this a lot to a lot of things at the moment, but I think that is where it comes down to. It's people getting very protective about their little things and their little, their associations, and people get very protective, I think, of PUBG, because they're just like, it's PUBG, and it's like, that's what I tend to see, and that's the vibe that I get, that people don't like you talking bad about it. It's like when you think about other games, like whether it's Battlefield or whatever, people slate it and they really go after it. But I find that's often not so much the case with PUBG, or it's more that that's not necessarily right. It's more like people do criticize the game and people complain about performance and other things like this, but I think it's more in terms of, especially like PlayerUnknown, people don't aim it more at him, they aim it more at the game specifically. But the whole thing has just been kind of confusing, and it's like, if he's going to come out and say things like this that are vague, non-specific, don't really make any sense, it would probably be better if he just didn't say these things, for all concerned. Which leads us nicely into our last comment for today, which is from Wedge, who says, I'll make it very short, it's just stupid. If we follow his point of view, then Wolfenstein 3D and Doom was ripped off 1,000,000 times. And that is really where we come to with this whole thing. It really just doesn't make any sense, the stuff that PlayerUnknown Brendan Green was talking about, as I said in the video previously. It makes you kind of make wrong conclusions, and the simple fact is, as I explained clearly on the previous video, that you can't really protect this idea of, you know, a battle royale and so on, even down to even quite some of the details which you might think are very specific. I also do personally agree with some of the comments that we've seen today and some of the comments which were on the video. There was a lot of you guys saying the same kind of thing, which is kind of what I alluded to a little bit as well, which was that Battle Royale is a successfully developed standalone mod. It's definitely surprising to see just how popular it has become, for sure. But as I said originally, when you really break it down, it really doesn't do anything that revolutionary. And that is not to knock its success at all. That is not to either, and that's certainly not to knock its conceptualization either. You know, taking something which works, making it functional, identifying something that people enjoy, these are really laudable. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong there. But I think that we should just try to keep our feet on the ground a little bit and not get too carried away. You know, this game is not rocket science. It's something which was popular because people enjoyed the dynamic of the sort of battle royale mode. You know, people come in, one man leaves. It's straightforward. As well, even any of the mechanics in there in terms of the encroaching circle, again, you know, it is battle royale from the movie, from the book. You know, it's battle royale. You start on an island with a load of kids from the school. They have to kill each other off to the death. Random sectors basically close it down to ensure that they stay together. I mean, basically that is what the game is. They just took the concept of battle royale, translated it into a mod, which was then taken over into a standalone. I mean, that is really what it is to a T, and it just works. It just works as a gameplay style. But then to try and suggest in any way at all that you couldn't just take this and copy it over and over again in a load of different games is nonsensical. You know, basically what they have done is what really PlayerUnknown has achieved is enabling and highlighting that battle royale as a genre concept works, and that people like to play it. Now, for other companies to then take that idea and embellish it and maybe put their own take on it, which he's repeatedly said he's in favor of, I mean, they honestly can't really have anything to say about Fortnite, because as I say, I've not really even played Fortnite, but even I can just take a look at it for even a moment and see that it bears very little, if any, resemblance to this game whatsoever. And if they are going to get so nitpicky that, like, oh, this 1x thing in our game is appearing in their game, like for example people parachuting in or an encroaching space or anything like this, sorry, that just doesn't stand up. It's not unique enough. It's not identifiable enough unless they have taken literally an asset rip, or they've exactly copied your art style and translated it into there. Then you don't have a leg to stand on there, and that's all there is to it. Okay, now part 2 of Below the Line. This is where I pose a new topic of discussion for you guys to think about. Leave your comments down below and I'll pick the best ones next week to appear in the video. So this week's topic, daily quests. Do you enjoy them, and are they tediously manipulative? These days many games are not seen as a single release. They're often looked at as long-term investment strategies, not something to just release, secure a profit and move on. This is part and parcel of the microtransaction loot box world that gaming is slowly skewing toward. And daily quests, though, being less insidious and seemingly more constructive. But are they? I've kept this today fairly generalized on the actual game itself, because I think this is something that is implemented in a variety of less and more pervasive fashions depending on the game you're playing. It tends to lean more towards MMO games, but it slides very easily into mobile and even FPS genres. On the face of it, daily quests, they seem a pretty decent thing. They attract players back to the game, they keep the player pool healthy, and give people content to achieve when perhaps the core content has gone a little stale. Yet past those debatably positive points, they still seek to actually manipulate you as a player, to keep you coming back for more, and often, while not directly requiring you to purchase or invest in anything, they're often part of games which offer a long-term platform of some description. Now, whether that's a year's worth of DLC or some in-game microtransaction system, it's still a good way to get those people hooked into that. Now, I myself have never particularly bought into these systems because, luckily for me, they often contain things that I just don't care about. It's often cosmetic stuff or some small stat boost to unlock things, but in other games, this isn't always the case. In competitive free-to-play games, you're going to start to see that daily quests may in fact give you more benefits like special gold to pay for things. so that in turn, regular players who do not participate start to fall behind those who clock in and out and grind those dailies. It can occur in single-player games as well, notably mobile games, which I have a particular dislike for, as they often contain the most aggressive championing of push notifications combined with daily quests. Keep up, don't fall behind, don't waste your time, optimize it, so that even if you're logging into that daily, it's still baiting you to connect. You often can also have events or time-specific things where you have to basically get in every single day, because if you don't, you're going to miss out that opportunity to get, again, often maybe that cosmetic item. Now, it makes me also think about some beloved games like Harvest Moon, which achieved this idea of coming back daily but without any of those negative connotations. Now look, be clear, Harvest Moon, all you were doing there was basically looking after your crops, and generally raising your farm was part and parcel of the single player experience. It wasn't really a daily quest thing, it was just about you had to come back to the game day after day after day. But that was a very specific game designed to make you feel part of the timeline actively in that game. So it's not an example of a daily quest thing, it's just an example of a game which kind of required you to come back daily. And the reason I highlight that is to show that some games do kind of try to pull you into this idea of coming back to the game, but it's about the experience of that game, not so much some kind of ulterior motive. That's what I'm trying to get to. Now, games which are simply trying to make you feel like you're moving in slow motion, unless you are actually participating in these things, they're not trying to make you feel part of the game. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, you better clock in or you're going to fall behind. So what's often the ultimate goal with daily quests? Unsurprisingly, it's either for fairly accepted DLC interaction of more standard content, i.e. keeping you interested, maybe they're going to want that DLC, or it's more for the dirty side of things. Like, hey, you sick of doing those dailies? Why don't you buy a gold pack and you can get 2 weeks of daily earnings for just $5.99. The other irritating thing with the concept of daily quests or daily challenges, whatever, is that you usually have to focus specifically on them, which means it's actively detracting playtime away from what you might ordinarily be wanting to do. They're also usually frustratingly unimaginative, and that probably speaks volumes to the fact that it's not about keeping people interested, it's about people understanding there's an inherent value in them, and to log in and do them really is just being boring work, clock in, clock out. It's also probably by design to make them not so tedious that people can still be bothered to do them, but not tedious enough that people wouldn't consider purchasing some microtransactions to circumvent the irritating time wasted on those rinsing and repeat missions. Still, there is a right way to implement the idea of dailies as actually being more rewarding, more of a thank you and less of a chore, more of a handshake. So games like Siege do it pretty well by just combining things that you would already be doing into dailies to basically help you out. This makes you feel like you're getting something a little more than just normally playing, perhaps giving you a slight focus, but without distorting your actual gameplay and choices to the point you feel like you're actually being manipulated. As I say, it should be like a handshake from the game, a little thank you for playing today, rather than creating that nagging feeling in the back of your head that if you miss it, you miss out. Guys, thoughts as always down below. What do you think about daily quests, daily missions, the way that they're put in? Give some examples if you've got them of the worst and the best. Thanks for watching as always. If you enjoyed, hit that like, help support me guys and the channel. See you next week for Below the Line.